I gave my husband my kidney to save his life. 6 months later, he told me a sick woman couldn't satisfy his needs and left me for a younger woman his mother picked out. They thought I was just a broken down, used up part they could discard. But they forgot one thing about the gift I gave him. You can't live without it. And while I was figuring out how to take it back, karma stepped in and did the job for me, leaving him paralyzed and penniless. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. My name is Veronica Hayes, and I once gave a man a piece of my body to save his life. This is the story of how he tried to ruin mine in return. The man I married, Lawrence Hayes, could sell sunshine to a man standing in the desert. For 30 years I'd watched him do it. As the top manager at Charlotte's most exclusive luxury car dealership, he had a charisma that was like a physical force. His laugh was rich and deep, his smile could disarm armies, and he had a way of making every person he spoke to feel like they were the most important person in the world. He was handsome, popular, and deeply loved in our community. And I, Veronica Hayes, a high school principal who dealt in logic and lesson plans, was utterly, completely devoted to him. Our life was good. We had a beautiful home in a quiet, leafy neighborhood, a wide circle of friends, and a deep, comfortable love that had weathered 3 decades. I was proud of my career, proud of the young minds I was helping to shape. He was proud of his success. We were a team, a power couple in our own quiet way. Then the diagnosis came. Kidney failure. The words fell like stones into the placid pool of our life. It was aggressive, the doctors said. His kidneys were shutting down at an alarming rate. Without a transplant, he would die. The search for a donor began immediately. His family was tested. Friends offered. But no one was a match. With every passing week, I watched the light in my vibrant, charismatic husband begin to dim. The color drained from his face. His booming laugh became a tired wheeze. He was tethered to a dialysis machine 3 times a week, a process that left him exhausted and frail. The confident, charming man I knew was disappearing before my eyes, replaced by a hollow-eyed ghost haunted by his own mortality. And then a miracle. Or so it seemed at the time. I was tested, more out of a sense of duty than any real hope. The call came from the transplant coordinator. I was a perfect match. Not just a good match, a perfect one. The odds were astronomical, she'd said, a 1 in 100,000 chance. When I told Lawrence, he wept. It was the first time I had seen him cry since his father's funeral. He held my hands, his own trembling, and looked at me with an expression of such raw, desperate gratitude that it broke my heart. "Ronnie," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. "You're my angel. You're saving my life." But I was scared. I was 54 years old. It was major surgery. I was a principal responsible for hundreds of students and staff. The recovery, the risks. My logical mind was screaming with caution. I needed time to think, to process. But Lawrence's desperation didn't allow for time. The begging began. It was constant, gentle, and utterly relentless. He'd bring me my coffee in the morning, his hands shaking, and tell me he couldn't imagine a world without me in it. He'd call me from the dialysis center, his voice weak, and tell me he was only holding on because of the hope I'd given him. Flowers started arriving at my office at the school, huge, extravagant bouquets with cards that read, "To my savior, my hero, my everything. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you." He'd sit with me in the evenings, holding my hand, and paint a picture of our future together, a future that was only possible because of me. He promised me trips to Europe, a second honeymoon, a life of ease and joy. He promised me he would spend every day for the rest of his life showing me how grateful he was. His mother, Estelle, a formidable woman whose approval I had spent 30 years trying to earn, called me, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Veronica, you are the answer to my prayers," she'd said. "You are giving me back my son." The pressure was immense, a tidal wave of emotional blackmail disguised as love and desperation. My rational fears were drowned out by the pleas of the man I loved. How could I say no? How could I watch him wither away and die, knowing I held the key to his survival within my own body? So I said yes. The surgery was scheduled. I put my career on hold, taking a leave of absence from the school I had dedicated my life to. I put my faith in the surgeons, in Lawrence's promises, in the love we had built over 30 years. The procedure was a success. The moment he woke up from the anesthesia with my kidney already working inside him, the change was immediate. The color returned to his cheeks. The light came back into his eyes. Within days he was sitting up, laughing with the nurses, the old, charismatic Lawrence resurrected from the ashes. And he was true to his word. For the first few months I was treated like a queen. The flowers were endless. He bought me a beautiful diamond necklace, clasping it around my neck and calling me his most precious jewel. He threw a massive rebirth party in our backyard and stood before all our friends, his arm around my waist, and gave a speech that brought everyone to tears. "I stand here tonight a healthy man for one reason and one reason only," he declared, his voice booming with renewed strength as he raised a glass to me. "Because this woman, my incredible wife, gave me the gift of life. She gave me a piece of herself so that I could live. She's my hero, my savior, and I will love and honor her for all the days of my life." Our friends and family applauded, their eyes shining with emotion. I stood beside him, my heart swelling with love, and believed every single word. I had done the right thing. I had saved the man I loved and our future together, a future full of the gratitude and devotion he had promised, stretched out before us, bright and beautiful. I had given him the gift of life. I had no idea it would come at the cost of my own. The initial euphoria of the successful transplant carried us through the first few months. Lawrence was thriving, a walking, talking miracle of modern medicine. He was back at the dealership, charming clients and breaking sales records. He had more energy than he'd had in years, his life handed back to him shiny and new. My life, however, was a different story. My recovery was not the smooth, straightforward process the doctors had hoped for. While the surgery had saved Lawrence, it had awakened a host of sleeping demons within my own body. The donation, a massive physical trauma, seemed to trigger a cascade of complications. A deep, unshakable fatigue settled into my bones, a weariness so profound that some days just walking to the mailbox felt like climbing a mountain. My blood pressure, always perfect before, began to skyrocket unpredictably. A dull, persistent ache took up residence in my back and side, a constant, unwelcome reminder of the piece of me that was missing. I had planned to return to my job as principal after a few months of recovery. My school, my students, my staff, they were my passion. But my body betrayed me. I couldn't manage the long hours, the constant stress, the sheer physical energy the job demanded. After a tearful meeting with the school board and my doctor, I made the heartbreaking decision to take an early retirement. At 55, my career, a central pillar of my identity, was over. It was during this period, as my world was shrinking, that the cruel shift in Lawrence began. It wasn't a sudden change, but a slow, insidious erosion of the gratitude he had so loudly proclaimed. The flowers stopped first. Then the little compliments, the thoughtful gestures. His doting attention, which had once been a healing balm, was replaced by a growing impatience. He started complaining about the mounting medical bills. My medical bills. "Another prescription?" he'd ask, looking at the receipt from the pharmacy with a frown. "Ronnie, do you really need all these pills? We're trying to save for that trip to Italy, remember?" The trip he had promised me, the one that was supposed to celebrate our new life, was now being used as a weapon against the very real consequences of that new life. His resentment grew more overt as my physical limitations became more apparent. I no longer had the energy to host the dinner parties he loved, to keep the house in the immaculate condition he preferred, or to accompany him to the endless stream of social and corporate events his job required. "You're tired again?" he'd say, the sympathy in his voice now replaced with a sharp edge of annoyance. He'd be standing in the doorway of our bedroom, dressed in a sharp tuxedo, ready for a gala. "It's the biggest charity event of the year, Ronnie. It looks bad if I show up alone." "I'm sorry, Lawrence," I'd say, my body aching. I can't." He wouldn't argue. He'd just sigh, a heavy, theatrical sound of disappointment, and say, "Fine. I'll make your excuses." Again. He made me feel like a burden, a social liability. The hero he had toasted in front of all our friends was now an inconvenience. The cruelty became more personal, more pointed. He knew where my insecurities lay. He started to criticize my appearance. The surgery had left a long, pale scar on my abdomen, and I had gained some weight from the new medications and my forced inactivity. "You should really try to get back to the gym, honey," he'd say casually, looking me up and down as I dressed. "You've let yourself go a bit." One evening I broke down. We were sitting in the living room and the pain in my side was particularly bad. I was trying not to show it, but he noticed me wince. "Is it your side again?" he asked, not with concern but with a familiar weariness. It hurts, Lawrence, I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. It hurts all the time. I expected a word of comfort, a gentle touch, a flicker of the gratitude he had promised would last a lifetime. Instead, he leaned back on the sofa, steepled his fingers, and looked at me with a cold, appraising stare. You know, Ronnie, he said, his voice calm and measured, I'm grateful for what you did. I truly am. But the deal was that I would get to live my life again. The full life. I didn't sign up to be a caretaker for a sick woman. I didn't marry a sick woman. I married a vibrant, energetic woman, a principal, someone who could keep up with me. And that woman is gone. The words were like a slap in the face. He was talking about me as if I were a defective product, a car that no longer performed as advertised. The vibrant woman he married was gone because she had given a piece of her body to save him. The career he admired was gone because of the sacrifice she had made for him. He was blaming me for the consequences of my own generosity. The man I had saved was now punishing me for saving him. The loving husband who had wept with gratitude was gone, replaced by this cold, cruel stranger who looked at me with resentment in his eyes. The beautiful future he had painted for me had been a lie, a sales pitch to get what he wanted. And I, the intelligent, logical high school principal, had fallen for it completely. I had signed the contract with my body, and now I was living with the fine print, which stated in no uncertain terms that my value had expired the moment my kidney was no longer my own. The shift was complete. The savior had become the burden. The Cold War in our house dragged on for months. Lawrence and I were living like two polite, resentful roommates, the silence between us thick with unspoken accusations. He was rarely home, preferring late nights with clients and weekend golfing trips to sitting in the quiet house with his ailing wife. I, in turn, retreated into myself, focusing on the small, manageable world of my doctor's appointments and my quiet routines. The love I had felt for him was curdling into a mixture of confusion and a deep, simmering anger. I had saved his life, and in return he had made mine a living hell. It was his mother, Estelle, who brought the war to its brutal, inevitable conclusion. Estelle had always been a difficult woman, proud, cold, and possessive of her only son. Her brief period of warmth towards me after the transplant had long since vanished, replaced by a familiar, critical disapproval. She saw my illness not as a tragic consequence of my sacrifice, but as a personal failing, an inconvenience that was tarnishing her son's new, perfect life. She started visiting more often, always unannounced. She'd walk through my house, her eyes scanning for dust, her lips pursed in a thin line of judgment. She'd bring Lawrence his favorite foods, things I no longer had the energy to cook, and make a great show of telling him, "You need someone to take proper care of you, baby." Then one Tuesday afternoon she arrived with someone else in tow. A young woman, probably in her early 30s, with a bright, eager smile and a perfectly toned body that spoke of hours in the gym. "Veronica, dear," Estelle said, breezing past me into the foyer. "This is Brianna Collier. She's a wonderful young woman from my church. I thought she could come by and help you out around the house a few days a week. You clearly can't manage on your own." Brianna smiled at me, a sweet, pitying smile that made my skin crawl. "It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice dripping with syrupy sincerity. "Your mother-in-law has told me so much about you. You're such a brave woman." I knew with a chilling certainty that this was not about helping me. This was a reconnaissance mission. Brianna wasn't there to dust my furniture. She was there to inspect it, to see if it was worth salvaging or if it was time to replace the entire set. Over the next few weeks she became a fixture in my home, a constant, cheerful presence that felt more like a haunting. She'd organize my pantry, chat happily with Lawrence when he was home, and always be there with a sympathetic look and a helping hand, subtly highlighting my own inadequacies. The final act came on a Sunday. Lawrence had just returned from a weekend golf trip. Estelle called to say she was coming over to have a family talk. I thought it was about finances or perhaps the holidays. I was naive. It was an ambush. We sat in the living room, me on the sofa, Lawrence in his favorite armchair, and Estelle on the edge of a straight-backed chair, like a judge about to deliver a verdict. Estelle began, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Veronica," she said, "we need to discuss the reality of this situation. Lawrence has been given a second chance at life. The full life. He deserves to live it to the fullest." I looked at Lawrence, expecting him to say something to defend me. He just stared at his hands, his face a blank mask. A man has needs, Veronica, Estelle continued, her voice dropping into a confidential, conspiratorial tone. He has physical needs. He needs a partner who can keep up with him, who can entertain his clients, who can be a wife to him in every sense of the word. She paused, letting the ugly insinuation hang in the air. You are a sick woman. You cannot provide that for him anymore. It's not your fault, but it is the truth. My blood ran cold. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was discussing my marriage, my health, my intimacy with my husband as if it were a business negotiation. And that is why, Estelle said, her voice brightening as if she were announcing the winner of a raffle, we have found a solution. Brianna. She is a wonderful, healthy, vibrant young woman. She adores Lawrence. She is capable of giving him the life he deserves. She can take care of him. I stared at her, speechless. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of it was like a physical blow. She wasn't just suggesting an affair. She was proposing my replacement. She had vetted and approved her son's new wife while I was still living in the house. I finally found my voice, my words a choked whisper. I turned to my husband, the man whose life I held in my hands just months before. Lawrence, are you hearing this? Are you going to let her talk to me this way? He finally looked up at me and there was no love in his eyes. No gratitude. Not even pity. There was only a cold, weary resignation. He was not a victim in this. He was a co-conspirator. Ronnie, he said, his voice soft, which made it even more brutal. My mother is right. It's not working. I'm not happy. He took a deep breath. I think it's for the best. I want a divorce. The words shattered the last vestiges of the love I had for him. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was an assassination. They had sat me down in my own living room and calmly, methodically, executed my role as his wife. They had deemed me unfit, obsolete, and had already chosen my successor. My sacrifice hadn't just been forgotten. It had been used to disqualify me from the very life I had saved. I stood up, my body trembling with a rage so pure and so potent it burned away my tears. I looked at Estelle with her cold, triumphant smile. I looked at Lawrence, my husband, the man who now carried a piece of my body inside him, who was discarding the rest of me like trash. Get out, I whispered, my voice shaking with fury. Now, Veronica, be reasonable, Estelle began. Get out. I screamed, the sound ripping from my throat, raw and ragged. Both of you. Get out of my house. Lawrence for the first time looked startled. He had expected tears, pleading, a quiet, dignified collapse. He had not expected this. He had not expected the woman he had broken to still have this much fight in her. They left. And I stood alone in the center of my living room, the silence they left behind ringing in my ears. The betrayal was complete. They had taken my health, my career, and now my marriage. But as the shock subsided, it was replaced by a new, terrifying and powerful emotion. I didn't just want to survive this. I wanted revenge. And I knew exactly what his greatest vulnerability was. It was the very piece of me he carried inside him. The days following the ambush were a blur of pain and fury. I moved out of the house I had shared with Lawrence for 30 years and into a small, furnished apartment. The move was a blur of boxes and logistics handled mostly by my best friend, Simone Jackson. Simone, a sharp and tenacious family law attorney, had been my rock for decades. When I called her and told her what had happened, the silence on the other end of the line was so cold, I thought the call had dropped. He did what? She finally said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. That ungrateful son of a bitch. Oh, we are going to burn him to the ground. Her anger was a comfort, a validation of my own rage. But my rage was beginning to curdle into something darker, more obsessive. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. My waking hours were consumed by a single looping thought. He is living and breathing because of me. The kidney inside him, the organ that was filtering his blood and keeping him alive, was mine. It was a gift freely given out of love. But he had violated the terms of that gift. He had broken the sacred contract between a savior and the saved. And in my fevered, grief-stricken mind, I decided I had the right to take it back. This thought became a dangerous obsession. I spent hours online, falling down a rabbit hole of medical journals and obscure pharmaceutical websites. I, the former high school principal who once confiscated cell phones from students for cheating, was now researching immunosuppressant rejection drugs. I learned the names of medications designed to make a body attack a foreign organ. I read about dosages, side effects, and methods of administration. My plan was as simple as it was monstrous. I would find a way to get these drugs. I would find a way to introduce them into his food or drink. I would watch as his body began to reject my kidney. I would watch him get sick again, watch the life I had given him drain away, and when he was back on that dialysis machine, desperate and dying, I would be the one to tell him why. I wanted him to know that the woman he had discarded had the power to unsave him. It was a fantasy born of unimaginable pain. A dark, twisted revenge plot that consumed me. I saw it as a form of justice. He didn't deserve my kidney. He didn't deserve to live a healthy life built on the ruins of mine. But my own body became my biggest obstacle. The chronic illness that had made me so disposable to Lawrence now made it impossible for me to carry out my dark plan. The fatigue was a lead blanket I couldn't throw off. The pain in my side was a constant, draining presence. Some days I barely had the energy to get out of bed, let alone orchestrate a complex, sinister plot. My desire for revenge was a roaring fire in my mind, but my body was too weak to even gather the kindling. I never bought the drugs. I never got further than the terrifying late-night research. My sickness, the very thing that had caused my suffering, had inadvertently saved me from becoming a monster. The divorce proceedings began with Simone at the helm, fighting with the ferocity of a lioness protecting her cub. Lawrence, free of me, had moved Brianna into our house almost immediately. His mother, Estelle, was reportedly overjoyed, hosting parties to introduce Lawrence's new, perfect partner. They were building their new life on the ashes of mine, and the injustice of it all ate at me every single day. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday in October. It was a quiet, anticlimactic affair, a legal severing of a bond that had been emotionally annihilated months before. I was officially a single, divorced, sick, retired woman. I felt like I had lost everything. And then 2 weeks later, fate or karma or whatever you want to call it stepped in. The call came from a mutual friend, her voice hushed with shock. "Veronica, have you heard? It's Lawrence. There's been an accident." My heart stopped. "A car crash," she said. He had been driving home from the dealership, apparently speeding, and had lost control on a wet patch of road. His new luxury car, the symbol of his success, had wrapped around a tree. He was alive. But that was the only good news. I found out the details later, through the grim gossip that spread through our old circle of friends. He had suffered a severe spinal cord injury. The damage was extensive, irreparable. Lawrence Hayes, the vibrant, energetic man who had left his sick wife because he deserved a full life, was permanently paralyzed from the waist down. The irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost suffocating. The man who had pretended to be grateful for my gift of health was now truly, irreversibly disabled. The man who couldn't bear to be around a sick person was now confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. He had been so desperate to escape the confines of a life with me, and he had ended up in a prison of his own making, a prison of flesh and bone from which there was no escape. My dark, vengeful fantasies of seeing him sick and weak seemed pathetic and small in the face of this new reality. I had wanted to cause his kidney to fail. Instead, his entire lower body had failed him. I had wanted to put him back on a machine. Instead, he was now permanently attached to a wheelchair. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt a profound, chilling sense of awe at the universe's capacity for a justice far more poetic and terrible than anything I could have ever conceived. I had been spared the darkness of my own revenge plot, only to watch a far more fitting punishment be delivered by a random twist of fate. The game had changed once again, and the reckoning was far from over. Lawrence's accident threw the final divorce settlement negotiations into chaos. What should have been a straightforward division of assets became a complex and emotionally charged battlefield. Lawrence, now facing a lifetime of disability and astronomical medical expenses, tried to play the victim. His lawyers argued that his circumstances had drastically changed and that he needed the majority of our shared assets to fund his new, difficult reality. They argued that I, as his ex-wife, should be grateful for the years we'd had and walk away with a modest settlement. They underestimated Simone. My best friend, my legal warrior, saw their argument for what it was. One last desperate attempt by a cruel man to exploit my generosity. She was having none of it. "They want to play victim?" she said to me in her office, her eyes flashing with a cold fire. "Fine. We'll show the court who the real victim is. We're not just arguing about assets, Veronica. We're arguing about a debt. A life debt. The case went before a judge, a stern, intelligent woman in her 60s named Judge Miller. Lawrence was there in a state-of-the-art wheelchair, his face a pale, bitter mask of self-pity. Brianna, his new fiancée, sat behind him, her youthful, pretty face looking strained and exhausted. The role of doting partner to a vibrant, successful man had suddenly become the role of full-time caregiver to a paralyzed, resentful invalid. It was clearly not what she had signed up for. Estelle was there too, looking shaken but still defiant, her eyes shooting daggers at me from across the courtroom. Simone's opening argument was a masterpiece. She didn't begin with the finances. She began with the story of my kidney. Your Honor, she began, her voice clear and strong, resonating through the quiet courtroom. Before we discuss a single dollar, we must first discuss a contribution to this marriage that is impossible to quantify, yet is at the very heart of this case. We are here today because my client, Veronica Hayes, gave her husband, the defendant, the gift of life. She willingly underwent major life-altering surgery to donate her own kidney, saving him from certain death. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. She then walked the judge through the entire story. She presented my medical records showing my perfect health before the surgery. She presented the records of my chronic illness after the surgery. She presented my letter of resignation from my position as high school principal, a career I had loved and excelled at, which I was forced to abandon. Ms. Hayes did not just give her husband a kidney, Your Honor, Simone argued, her voice rising with passion. She gave him her health. She gave him her career. She gave him her future earning potential. She invested her own body and her own future into the marital partnership. And what did she get in return for this priceless gift? This is when she turned her attention to Lawrence's betrayal. She presented the timeline of his affair with Brianna. She submitted the story of the family meeting, where Estelle and Lawrence had informed me I was being replaced. She painted a picture of such profound cruelty and ingratitude that a hush fell over the courtroom. You could see the judge's expression hardening, her eyes, which had initially held a flicker of sympathy for the man in the wheelchair, now turning to stone. Lawrence's lawyer tried to counter, arguing that his accident was a tragic, unforeseen event that rendered all prior agreements moot. He argued that his needs were now greater than mine. Simone was ready for him. His needs are great, Your Honor, that is true, she said, her voice dripping with irony. He now requires round-the-clock care. He needs assistance with the most basic functions of life. It's a tragic, difficult situation. It is, in fact, the very situation my client, Ms. Hayes, found herself in for months after her surgery, a surgery she had for his benefit. When she was sick, when she was in pain, when she needed a caregiver, where was Mr. Hayes? He was not caring for her. He was casting her aside for a younger, healthier model. He shirked his duty as a husband and a caregiver at the first sign of trouble. The fact that he now finds himself in need of the very care he refused to provide his own wife is not a legal argument, Your Honor. It is a cosmic irony. The final blow came when Simone addressed the finances. She argued that the kidney was, in a legal sense, a massive, non-refundable investment into the marriage. She argued that my lost income, my ongoing medical expenses, and the permanent damage to my health should be compensated. And then she went after his disability payments. Mr. Hayes will be receiving substantial lifelong disability payments as a result of his tragic accident, she said. These payments are intended to support him in his new life. But he would not have a life at all were it not for my client. Therefore, she is entitled to a significant portion of any and all income he receives, for the rest of his life. He owes her a debt, Your Honor. A lifelong debt. And today we are asking the court to enforce its collection. Judge Miller delivered her judgment right there from the bench. Her voice was cold, her disgust with Lawrence palpable. Mr. Hayes, she said, looking directly at him, your actions as presented to this court are unconscionable. You took the most precious gift a person can give and treated it, and the woman who gave it, with a level of callousness and cruelty that is frankly shocking. She then delivered the verdict. I was awarded the house free and clear. I was awarded 70% of all our marital assets and savings. And in the most stunning blow of all, she ordered that 50% of Lawrence's lifelong disability payments were to be paid directly to me as permanent alimony. You owe Mrs. Hayes a debt that can never truly be repaid. the judge concluded, her gavel striking the wood with a sharp crack of finality. "But this court will ensure that you spend the rest of your life attempting to do so financially." I walked out of that courtroom into the sunshine, with Simone's arm linked through mine. I felt no triumph, no joy. Just a quiet, profound sense of vindication. The legal system had seen the truth. It had acknowledged my sacrifice and punished his betrayal in the only language he truly understood: money. The courtroom reckoning was over. He had been left with his life, his paralysis, and a lifelong bill for the kidney he had so carelessly thrown away. The aftermath of the court's decision was swift and decisive. The life Lawrence and Brianna had envisioned, a life of social events, luxury travel, and carefree happiness, was replaced by a grim, bleak reality. They were financially crippled. With the majority of their assets gone and half of his disability income diverted to me, they were forced to sell the beautiful home we had once shared. They moved into a small, wheelchair-accessible rental unit on the far side of town, a place with narrow hallways and a view of a strip mall. The vibrant, charming Lawrence was gone, replaced by a bitter, angry man trapped in a useless body. His charisma curdled into resentment. His world shrank to the four walls of their small apartment. Brianna, the young, healthy woman who was supposed to be his prize, was now his full-time unpaid nurse. Her days were filled not with champagne and galas, but with catheters, bedpans, and the thankless, grueling work of caring for a profoundly disabled and deeply unhappy man. The love she thought she had for him quickly withered under the relentless strain of her new reality. Their arguments, I heard through the grapevine, were frequent and vicious. She was trapped, bound to him by a sense of duty and the lack of financial resources to leave. She had wanted to be the wife of a successful man. Instead, she had become the caretaker of an invalid. It was a prison she had willingly walked into, but the door had locked behind her. As for me, I sold the house immediately. Like Brianna, I wanted no part of the life it represented. The memories were too painful, the ghosts too prevalent. I took the proceeds from the sale and my substantial settlement and bought myself a beautiful, light-filled, single-story condo in a quiet, peaceful community. Everything was accessible, everything was new, everything was mine. The first year was about healing both physically and emotionally. I established a routine with my doctors and physical therapists. I learned to manage my chronic pain and fatigue. I found a rhythm for my new, quieter life. I started with small things. I adopted a cat, a quiet, gentle companion whose soft purr was a comfort in the silent evenings. I joined a book club. I took a class on watercolor painting, discovering a creative side of myself I never knew existed. Slowly, carefully, I began to rebuild. The rage that had consumed me after the betrayal began to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I had my health challenges, yes, but I also had my freedom. I had my financial security. I had my dignity, which the court had so powerfully affirmed. But something was still missing. I felt a need to give my experience a purpose beyond my own survival and vindication. I thought about the unique nature of my pain, the betrayal not just of a spouse but of a donor, the violation of a gift of life. And I wondered how many others were out there carrying similar silent wounds. With the help of Simone, I started to research. I found stories online, buried in forums and support groups, of people who had donated organs to family members or spouses, only to be abandoned, mistreated, or taken for granted after the fact. It was a hidden, unspoken form of abuse. An idea began to form. I used a portion of my settlement to rent a small, comfortable space in a local community center. I put up a flyer. The heading was simple: The Giver's Circle, a support group for organ donors. The first meeting, only 3 people showed up. A father who had given a piece of his liver to his alcoholic son, who was now drinking again. A woman who had donated a kidney to her sister, who now refused to speak to her over a petty family argument. We sat in a circle and shared our stories, our pain, our complex feelings of anger, grief, and misplaced generosity. For the first time, I felt truly understood. The group grew. Week by week, more people came. We became a community, a safe space to navigate the unique emotional landscape of being a living donor. We shared resources, offered comfort, and simply listened. I, the former high school principal, had found a new flock to guide. My purpose was no longer about shaping young minds for the future. It was about helping wounded souls heal in the present. I realized then that my dark fantasy of revenge had been a product of my pain, a desire to make him feel as powerless as I did. But the universe had a different plan. It had delivered a justice that was not about destruction but about balance. Lawrence was left in a prison of his own making, a living embodiment of his own selfishness. And I, the woman he had tried to destroy, was left with the resources and the experience to build something new and beautiful out of the wreckage of my old life. I never saw Lawrence again. I heard he and Brianna eventually separated, and he was now cared for by a rotation of state-appointed aides. His mother, Estelle, had to sell her own home to help pay for his mounting expenses. They were all broken in their own ways by the fallout of their own cruelty. I, on the other hand, was whole. Not healed perhaps in the way I was before the surgery. My body would always carry the scars, both visible and invisible. But my spirit was whole. I had found a purpose that transcended my pain. Sometimes I sit on my quiet patio, my cat purring in my lap, a watercolor painting drying on an easel beside me. I think about the woman who lay on an operating table, ready to give a piece of herself to save the man she loved. I don't pity her. I admire her. He was brave. He was loving. And when he tried to extinguish her light, she learned how to glow in the dark. My name is Veronica Hayes. And this is not a story about revenge. It's a story about reclamation. And the life I have now, a life of peace, purpose, and quiet dignity, is the sweetest victory of all.